So I'm Rebecca Roop. I'm the neighborhood engagement specialist with the city and a principal planner with Planning and Development Services. And I'll have the other, James, did you introduce yourself? You were standing, I know everybody knows you, but.
Yeah, James Angel, been on Manchester for 15 years.
And I think as president of your neighborhood association. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Chris Blue, I'm the Neighborhood Resources Coordinator, working with Rebecca, Neighborhood Resources team at PTSD.
So we're very happy to have Chris on board. Gabriel?
Gabriel, I'm planner. We're in entitlements and special districts, assisting with the tech stuff. And I also work with like Sunshine Mile District Overlay project, so I guess that's kind of in y'all's neighborhood.
Hi, everyone. Dan Bursick. I'm the planning administrator for Planning and Development Services.
Hi, everyone. Corinne Manning, Deputy Director for Planning and Development Services.
And why don't we have the people online introduce themselves? Hi, folks online. Can you introduce yourselves?
I'm Joan Thomas. I live on Arroyo Chico.
Great, Brian?
Am I unmuted?
Welcome. Richard?
Richard Rawadi, I live in Arroyo Chico.
Great. And Gregory?
Cheryl Toth and Rich Lear on Devon Street.
There's always one surprise. That's great. Well, I'm gonna let James open it and then Barbara's gonna talk a little bit and then we'll get into the presentation.
Okay, well, I don't have a whole lot to say. Becca asked me to open it up, so welcome. Yeah, I guess this is an opportunity to learn more about the plan. I think a lot of people have already heard Barbara talk about it, but she's going to go through some of that again. Just what's in the plan and process to get here so far. And then I guess the city will answer other questions we have about the process. What happens before the plan, the draft plan, goes before the city mayor and council.
So we have this board that Barbara is, it's a cheat sheet for Barbara, but I think she knows all of this already. But we also have it on a slide for the people who are watching this hybrid, so.
Oh, good.
So if you can go there, yeah.
Yeah, one more time, I'm sure you're all tired of this. In the spring of 2018, the board said, let us go in to redo the plan. And part of the emphasis was that this was being done all over the city, that all the neighborhoods were asked to redo their plans since they're all areas. So that we met several times, and then we went before the general meeting that fall in 2018 and sort of introduced the plan and asked for input. And at that meeting, all the people that were there gave their input about what they'd like to see in the plan and stuff. And we had to go off and we did a survey based on some of those concepts and all, and covered the neighborhood with that survey and got back a fairly decent response. And then we took that input as well and massaged it and created the main topics and some of the objectives under those, and then came back again in the general meeting in 2020 and discussed the goals and the objectives at that point. Then in 2021, we also conducted another survey. Now, by this point, the issue was that COVID, of course, had hit. So we were not getting to meet in person at that point because of COVID. So we tried to keep it moving despite the fact that there were limited things. Then in 2021, we sort of stepped back because the Sunshine Mile became a big issue. And the newspaper at that point in time quoted the neighborhood plan. And the only plan they had access to, of course, was the old plan, because we were still a draft that had not even been released to the neighborhood at that point. So we just sort of put everything on hold until that went away. And then we went back to the mayor, to the city council and made sure that we had the blessing of the city council and the planning department of what we were doing. We showed them where we were, we got feedback. And then starting in 2022, we go back and forth a lot with the city, answering their needs and answering the needs of the city, of the neighborhood as well. We even had it, towards the end of COVID, the main part of COVID, where everything was so restricted, we did meet in Melbourne Plaza for a person-to-person kind of meeting, because we were afraid that not everyone was getting their say at that point. Again, we took all that feedback and redid it. And so it's been a iterative process over a very long period of time, as you can see. And then finally, in 2022 and 2023, the city did their final go through, and we brought that to y'all in February of this month and at a general meeting, and the neighborhood voted to accept the plan. So that's what brings us to tonight.
Thank you. Yes, it's very, I really commend you, and going through COVID was really challenging for a lot of neighborhoods doing various kinds of planning. And it's, I think, always harder to keep things going when they drag on longer, because you lose some of the momentum. So you should really pat yourselves on the back for making it through that process. I also wanted to mention before I get started that there are bathrooms in, but most of you are probably familiar with this building, just in case you're not, they're back there. And we are recording. Does anybody have an objection to that? Okay, and Chris Blue is actually taking some notes too, or will. He won't take notes while I'm talking, but when you're talking, he'll take notes. Anyway, so this is what we're here for today. Your 1988 plan had a lot of really good goals in it. And as you know, because I know you've gone through this a lot, you actually met a lot of those goals, but we will talk a little about that too. But this is 36 years old. So I think when you think about it that way, it helps to think why you might be looking at doing an updated new plan. So I'm going to kind of give you an overview of what the primary purpose of the neighborhood plans are, what the city review process is, and how it's used by the city. It's kind of the up in the air, the bird's eye view. So I think this is really important, and I've found that sometimes neighborhoods and neighbors and community members aren't always aware of this relationship with our general plan. How many of you are familiar with Plan Tucson? So Plan Tucson, the state requires that a plan, a general plan, kind of another high up in the air plan be done every 10 years by a jurisdiction of the size of Tucson, larger jurisdictions. And we did one that was ratified by the voters, and that's what makes it actually quite interesting, is that the voters vote on it, and that's a bit unusual with plans. And so I think it's really important that you're aware of it if you're a voter, because it's going to be on your ballot. And it seems to be a little piece here, but it doesn't just float up there, it's actually connected. So it allows what are called specific plans. Doesn't require them, it allows them. And the neighborhood plan and the area plan are both kinds of specific plans. Also transportation plans, housing plans. There are a lot of plans that are specific plans. The point of a specific plan is that they are supposed to help implement the goals and policies of the general plan. And they're called specific plans because you would expect more specificity at that smaller scale about, if the general plan said, encourage water harvesting, you might say, encourage water harvesting on Exeter, or, something that's much more specific. So that's the idea of these plans. And in our land use code, when there are plans and the general plan being required, they are looked at, that it's part of the code that they be looked at when there's an action that comes along to make sure that it's consistent. So, and then you don't have to do a plan, but when there is a plan, then it follows that the land use code would, says you need to look at the plans that are applicable. So that's that. So the city review process for neighborhood plans, we hold a meeting, Planning and Development Services, which all of us are from, and we're meeting in collaboration with you, which is great, to provide information and answer questions that may not have been answered to date, or I'm sure sometimes they have been, and you'd like to, I know I often ask a question more than once. And then PDS and the other city departments will do a final review. We've been reviewing this as it goes along, but what we have to do is determine if it's ready to go to Planning Commission, and we need to write a staff report to Planning Commission. So obviously we want to go through it again. We submit the plan to the Planning Commission for a study session. And then it goes to a public hearing. Those are normally two different meetings, aren't they, Dan? Normally, in my experience anyhow. And then the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to mayor and council on whether to approve the plan, whether they feel the plan is, should move along. And mayor and council holds a public hearing, and then they decide on whether the plan should be adopted. So that's when the final decision comes up. Now, those two, the public hearings are really important because it is an opportunity for people to come and share their thoughts. So if there are people who have, find the plan challenging, they can come and talk about it. People who are supportive of it. We normally have representatives of the neighborhood association come to these so that they can even talk a little bit about the plan. So most recent one we've done is the Sam Hughes update. So what are they used for? Well, this is, again, primary use. We use them to review entitlements, land use entitlements. Often you think of rezonings, that's usually the one people talk about, but there are also variances and special exceptions. Entitlements means that the public gets to weigh in. You're changing things so the public gets to weigh in. I always try to remind people that, because, if people decide they want to build something in the zone they live in, let's say commercial, and they follow all the rules, you don't really get a chance to weigh in. They're following the rules. It's what we call as of right zoning. And so you may not like it, but there's really not an avenue for the public to comment. But for rezonings and entitlements, there is. Other city departments may review the plans when considering projects in areas that are addressed by plan. Transportation would be an obvious one. If they were thinking about bike paths or something, and they might look at a plan to see if it said anything, if that group of people were interested. You all want to use that plan to review entitlement requests, just like the city is reviewing it. You would be reviewing it to see if you think that the proposed rezoning is compatible with what you think are reasonable future uses. And then I think, you've probably used your plan in the past for coming up with agendas for your, or ideas for your board, projects that you'd like to do, grants. They're very good for grants because folks who are do grant applications are often looking for a public process, so you can show with your neighborhood plan that you actually had a public process that led to you being interested in looking for funds for, whatever it might be, water harvesting again. So your plan, and you probably could give me this presentation, but we wanted you to know that we we heard what you were saying, so this is go through this relatively quickly, but Gabriel? So the reasons that really stood out were both to recognize and celebrate the 1988 plan goals that you've achieved, which is quite impressive. And to acknowledge and address current issues and community-wide goals, because over 36 years, some things have changed, things that, you know, we have some different ideas. And then I just thought that was wonderful. I know Barbara had put this in a presentation she did with those wonderful pictures. And I just really think you should applaud yourself for this. This is really impressive. So, and I know this you've gone, but I think it's really, again, important to emphasize that you did a lot of public outreach and you got concerns identified. I think you all know what these are, but just quickly, the quality of life, land use, issues about what you want to maintain and height, safety emergencies, traffic and transportation, connectivity, which we often hear from neighborhoods, very important, and bikeability, walkability, urban forest and appearance, which I think your photographs attest to the fact that you've put time and energy in that. And then environmental resilience and rainwater, water harvesting. So that's great. And the focus areas you came up with are these, and I think you probably all are familiar with them. We're going to talk, this is the one, as I said initially, that we really focus on, that the city really focuses on, the land use and development. So we're going to just talk about that a little. So that's the section that we will most often reference in your land use plan. Important to realize. So your plan, as you probably know, has two large goals for land use and development, and just I will take time just to read this one. Work with the city and developers to ensure that any new development inside or adjacent to you want to go home or something, Gabriel? Broadmoor Broadway-Village neighborhood does not unreasonably and negatively impact existing residences. And then this goal is followed by 9 objectives and an action. And then the other one is balanced neighborhood and community-wide interest for future development within and adjacent to the neighborhood. And this goal is followed by 2 objectives and 2 actions. And then the section also includes 2 maps, a current zoning map and a future land use concept map. It's really important to understand that the city does look at that future land use concept map. That's usually where they turn to it, and then they look at the policies to see how they help to explain that map. So you're probably all familiar with your current zoning map. If any of you are interested, one of the things I find sometimes is that, I mean, I didn't really know anything about zoning, you know, before I got into planning. And I have to admit that right now, I'm not sure what zone I live in because I've never looked, because nobody's ever brought up anything. But we do have, if anybody's interested, we do have a couple copies, and I can tell you where to find it. We have, it's kind of a cheat sheet of development standards for different zones, because I know people often wonder, what can I do in this zone? How high can someone go in this zone? So we have them back here if anybody's interested in that. And I think that can be helpful. And then our future land use designation map. And then there are definitions of these future land use designations. We can talk about this in more detail, and both this is something Dan and Corin both have more experience than I do in application. But I think it's important to say that this map doesn't look a whole lot different than the map you had in your 1988, with the exception, obviously, of the Sunshine Mile, which happened independent of your neighborhood association. And we do have some additional slides if that comes up. And then finally, the next steps this is our projected timeline. So we will conduct a final review and prepare our staff report for planning commission. And that will have to be done. The actual report will have to be done by the 29th to get to the planning commission. Our hope is that it can go to planning commission on June 5th. Now, once in a while, there are quorum issues and all that we can't, we can't handle, we can't manage, but that's our hope. And then July 17th, the hope is for the public hearing and the recommendation to mayor and council. And that's, that would be tentative if their recommendation was, if the recommendation was to send it on to mayor and council, then that's what would happen. And once in a while, it doesn't work that way. And then finally, in August or September, mayor and council public hearing and decision on the plan's adoption. So that's kind of where we stand. And thanks for listening. Yes.
On the original map for zoning, I believe there's a section in here called historic commercial. And it doesn't appear on the new map. And I was just curious if that affects the Broadway-Village historical status. Did that go away with the new plan?
So there's a historic landmark designation on the Hirsch's Shoes parcel. And that may need to be updated on that map, actually.
So actually, yeah, I think there's a historic landmark actually at Broadway-Village, or
The pad also has.
Broadway-Village. So this is zoning, so it shows historic landmarks. The future land use designation doesn't change that. So they will maintain their historic status, those structures.
My main concern is the effect of the new plan on the historic status of Broadmoor, which is, affects a lot of owners with their property tax abatement, and whether or not the new plan will permit building that may take away from the ratio of the historic requirements.
So that's the
Do you
residential
foresee that?
neighborhood portion that has the historic landmark designation. This doesn't change any of the zoning that's in R1. So right now what the neighborhood has is a national historic landmark designation, which means property owners, if it's owner occupied, get a property tax rebate. That would not change. Nothing would change in zoning for one, and then nothing would change in terms of how those properties are reviewed, which means it's still up to property owners to maintain the historic status. That's true today, and that would be true going forward. This would not create like a historic preservation zone or something like that that would require additional design review, but this would basically maintain.
My concern was that it doesn't appear on the new map, historic landmark commercial. And, I'm concerned that maybe it was removed with the new plan.
So what the current map has is existing zoning, so it's shown in the plan, right, that has the existing zoning, or is it not? Is it on this map?
So the historic, the one you're talking about is this parcel right here. You can actually see the commercial portion, it's just not labeled. So it is on there, we just need to make sure that it's.
So is it underneath the zoning that's the purple?
It is, yes,
also?
yeah, so the Sunshine Mile is the overlay, and then the mixed use land use category is just a land use category that gives you direction for when a rezoning or a project in the Sunshine Mile would come in. So the HL, the historic landmark commercial, I think it's like C2, that's there, will not change, that'll remain exactly the same. We can just make sure that it's labeled on here. And
It's just not evident, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but is there some plan discussion about that historic landmark, or not landmark, the historic district designation of the residential portion? Is that mentioned in the plan document?
I don't, did they mention that?
I haven't looked at it for a while, I'm not sure, it's certainly within the board's work. To
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
Michael Weinberger would be the person.
If it's not, it's something that can easily be mentioned, because it's just kind of an
I'd have to look
update
at the
on
plan.
something that the neighborhood has accomplished in the past several years, so we can make sure it's clear that that is a recent designation.
No, it's been a while since I've actually. for that.
Something we can look at.
I'm pretty sure it is my.
There is a section in the plan about educating new residents
Right.
and potential contractors, except like people who are doing work in the neighborhood, that it is a historic district. Or the neighborhood is, whether or not that needs to be more explicit in the plan, I'm not a judge of, that's a new attendee to city planning meetings.
Right now, we run a thread of people buying and redoing houses.
Yes.
And that's how we're losing historic designation because we're actually built out.
So part of that, and I know you know this, and we see it in other neighborhoods that have national register status, which is different than having the local historic status, which has more hoops to jump through. What we see is the real need to keep educating people and also to have real estate agents understand something about what that historic status means. If, you know, the tax breaks you get them if you follow the rules. And so, yeah,
Our first goal is to maintain a neighborhood historic designation.
that was my memory. So I think that the education can never stop because you get new people coming in who don't know anything about that. And your concern really is losing resources that would threaten your designation, and that does happen. So that's an important thing to keep educating people about. People are often quite surprised about the tax breaks you can get, so that's a good incentive. But people also don't always understand that you can lose resources and therefore lose your designation. So it's an important point.
The concern I have with the new plan is the passive language that's in it. You know, we will cooperate, we will endeavor, we will do this, we will do that. And the original plan, which was passed by mayor and council in 1988, has specific guidelines that we shall. And this plan that we have, the new plan, in my viewpoint, is kind of weak tea. And I think it takes away a lot of the protection that the original plan had.
So currently, the National Register District, it doesn't by itself confer any protections for historic status of properties within that district or any design guidelines. 1988 plan, 2024 plan, neither one has any kind of mechanism to prevent somebody from coming in, knocking down a house and putting up something in a shipping container. Like neither one of them prevents that. There are other overlay districts, such as neighborhood preservation zones, which can prevent some of that by enacting mandatory design guidelines for a neighborhood. But neither the original or new neighborhood plans would stop somebody from doing that. So it's not a change.
It is a change.
It is a change.
It's the language is shall be made, but the original language.
But just so you understand, let me just address the point of language and then I'll get you, Christina. Plans are not law, right? They're advisory, they're not regulatory. And we normally, and I take responsibility for this, don't encourage language that sounds as if it's regulatory because it's not. And then what happens is the people say, my plan says, you know, you must, and then they get upset, but they are not regulatory. They're advisory, and that's part of the challenge with language. So if you say shall and must, there's not really an enforcement mechanism for that, which is the problem. So Christina, you had your hand.
Okay, I wasn't going to address historic designation, but I'm really good at seeing things that maybe people aren't thinking of. I live in one of the historic designation houses, you know, and I maintain it to make sure that I can keep it, and I'm on the edges. So as you mentioned, owner occupied. If quality of life suffers, anybody who decides to rent that out instead of living there, that house is taken out of the inventory. That wasn't my intention. I intended to retire in that house. I bought it with that in mind, with accessibility to the park and all that. I'm just concerned about what a plan that says we want to see higher density, we want to see more housing. I'm not anti-development. I worked on the entertainment zone that allowed people to put in commercial properties right next to churches at their request, right? So I'm not anti-development. I sign off on my neighbor's casita in her backyard. I never had a view of the mountains, so I'm not trying to preserve that. My house was built by one of the descendientes, if people here know what that is. There's a lot of history in that house. And when I first moved in, the owner told me, Cisco, who's dead now, he told me that his father had all these fruit trees on the east side. He's like, I don't know why he cut them all down. Well, I know why he did, because before they were screening out like the really bright lights of the houses to the east of me, but then you also screen out all the sun. So I know why he cut them all down. And I'm like, okay, now I'm back in the place. Do I put up more trees or what do I do? Because the light can be quite annoying, especially in our beautiful evenings. And I'm concerned about what the language in the plan will say to people looking to add more density, and that we're saying that, yeah, we want more. But you know, those of us on the outskirts of the neighborhood have to live with it.
You want to speak to the, Robert?
Well, the plan says that we want to maintain the existing zoning.
But
the city has allowed mother-in-law units, ADUs, excuse me. So, that's where the higher density comes in, and we already have them in our neighborhood. This is not something new.
I know, I live by one of them.
Yeah,
So illegal dumping outside the house.
So, I mean, our plan does not deviate in the land use from the original plan.
we disagree with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the reasons for having stronger language is people look at these and it makes them much more hesitant to make changes that we don't want. And taking the strong language out is encouraging changes. It will quickly change the neighborhood. I mean, there are neighborhoods around the city that don't have that kind of language, and they're two-story houses here, and you know, our
neighborhood do, like West University, and boy, those houses are maintained.
So let's back a little and say, so are you thinking, and I mean, right now, people can follow the zoning, right? I mean, the language in the plan has nothing to do with the underlying zoning. They can do whatever they want. Some of your underlying zoning maybe allow more density than you normally think it does. I find that that's often the case.
But it would allow ADUs, which we now have.
Well, now that's an ordinance.
Now that's single family residential. Single family residential.
Well, that's an ordinance. I understand you don't agree with it, but it's done, so nothing.
And I'm afraid that the city will come in once the sunset comes in and say, oh, that's a residence there, that's a residence. And now all of a sudden we'll only have.
Yeah, so that's sort of not, the plan can't do anything about that because it's done.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I think the concern has to do with rezonings, probably for the most part, which is where, you know, that's, I think, often the concern, where you could get that, what you think might be density. Now, I would say that language in the plan, whether it says encourage or must, is looked at the same way by the city. I mean, I think the city looks at.
I'm talking about new residents.
Yeah, but what is it that a new resident, what's in the plan?
They're gonna come in, I mean, we are under siege by developers.
But what?
I get a letter, I get a postcard every week, I wanna buy your house, I wanna buy your house. I get phone calls, you know, over and over again.
So what, I'm just curious what you think.
We are under siege. And if you take a resident who's an actual resident, not in, you know, some business, they comes in, they look at that neighborhood plan, they say, oh, good, I can build a second story on this. If you have stronger language.
Well, they can if the zoning's there, whether, it doesn't matter.
They can, the zoning is that they can do that, but if they see something that's
But your
discouraging
plan
that,
doesn't.
they're less likely to do that.
I don't think your plan says anything about what.
No,
You know.
the old plan did, the old plan was very.
Okay, so you want to please read us where it says it in the old plan.
Get us the
Because
old
we
plan.
literally listed.
The other thing is, you know, that list of dates was a little inaccurate. We have never, ever fully discussed this plan in front of the neighborhood. discussion has been, it was cut off in February. You cut it off. We never
Cut
got
it off after 5 years of discussion.
Yeah, we didn't, we
That's a
never
real
discussed
cutoff.
it. You would say, come to the board meetings. There were never
No,
neighborhood association
we
meetings. for that.
surveyed and we did it at general.
Your, a
meetings.
survey is
That's
a
discussed.
a survey does not, it does not indicate you're gonna wipe out protections. It's asking for new stuff, and you guys wiped out the protections in the old plan.
I want you to read.
So we
to me.
got,
I can't read it, it's on the first page, you start lying.
No, I'm not saying your own plan.
Yeah, we wanna have a.
Read
I
the
think
old plan.
Meredith has her hand up. Excuse me.
That's not true.
I don't
Excuse
think
me.
that you've read the old
And
plan.
Barbara, so I wanna just get to everyone, a round of having everybody be able to share their comments, and we might get to repeat comments, and I also wanna mention, Rebecca shared the timeline, that there's gonna be a formal public hearing before the planning commission.
And that's what we keep getting told, but now we can't talk.
No, absolutely, as I said, I wanna just hear from everybody in the room, and then we can have time for repeat questions and other comments, but we haven't heard from Meredith yet, she has her hand up. But I did also wanna make sure everyone knows, there's a public hearing where you can submit written comments and attend in person or, I'm sorry, but we can't hear who's speaking if you're speaking. So I was just speaking and I don't think everyone could hear what I was saying because you were speaking at the same time and others couldn't hear what Barbara was saying. So if we could just have one mic, one person speaking at a time, I promise we'll call on everyone. Okay, Rebecca, sorry, I just said one mic, so I wanna make sure everyone can hear.
Okay, so,
And then there's a clarification you have, and then we'll go to Meredith.
yeah, so what, your name is, sir?
John.
John, so what John is reading is the general policies in the old plan. Where he points out that in the intent statement, following policies are intended to guide future land use development, ensure the compatibility of new development with existing land use, which is pretty much your goal in your land use and development section. So it says he pointed out one policy, there are a number, but it has a policy that says limit new high density residential use to limit all new or redeveloped residential development to a maximum of 2 stories and a height of no more than 30 feet from the design grade, which I think is similar to what the plan, if you go back when the focus areas talk about focusing on R1 and R2 and I think 25 feet. So actually, a little lower than this, if I remember correctly.
Yes, we would have to look at that a little more
Yeah.
closely, but that's a great comment, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, well, we will take a look at this to see if it's.
There's more restrictions, and that's not the only place where it talks about the 2 stories. Okay, I just pulled that up quickly.
Yeah.
And for people to tell us that we have not read it is not true. I just pulled it up in less than 30 seconds. I'm also gonna ask a question about the purple zone up there. It's either the Sunshine Mile, which is the purple zone, or the other zoning that you're talking about, which I believe is the medium density multifamily residential.
Is that the one right here? This is
The purple. There's two zones in the purple. One of them is the Sunshine Mile, and there's a second one.
mixed use. So the whole purple is the mixed use. That's this portion here.
Mixed
and-
use, yes, okay. So you have the mixed use and the Sunshine Mile.
So the mixed use zoning refers to the underlying zoning, and the Sunshine Mile is what's called an optional zoning overlay, where if you want to use some of the incentives in the Sunshine Mile that can help reduce parking requirements or increase density or offer relief from like setbacks, you can opt into that as long as you're not making prohibited changes, like you can't opt into the Sunshine Mile and demolish a contributing structure, right?
One of
Whether it's
those
historic or whether it's a contributor to like the National Register District. So those are 2 different zonings and they can interact, but that requires an applicant to opt into that Sunshine Mile district. Otherwise, whatever they want to do is going to be based on the underlying zoning, which I
And
believe
the
is
underlying
what 62
zoning, the underlying zoning, okay, for the mixed use has an O2. You want to tell everyone how many units per acre an O2 has?
Is that commercial?
So there's an underlying zoning, there's a little bit of, here.
Here it is, it's right, yeah.
Turn to the next page.
Okay, yeah, so there's a little portion right here is what you're talking about, right? This 03 that's right here?
No, no, it's mixed use. And we're talking.
No, that's the mixed use land use category. It's not a
Yes.
zone.
It's a mixed use.
Are you
You have,
referring to the multifamily residential limits on C2 or
that's,
C3 zone?
multifamily is your, the little line, is the.
So I think, so this is the existing zoning, it's right here. So there's a
No,
little,
go to the future zone. I know.
So it's- so-
I know
Future
the-
land use.
it's future land use, it's not.
You have an O2 there.
So what the future land use concept?
Let Dan, just jump in.
You have
Okay, so-
O2. O2, look on the, you got that document, look on the very next page, go back to your hard copy. Look on the very next page, and it'll define R1, R2,
It's not,
C1,
it's not
C2, C3, O1.
Go back to your other, go back. Just here.
Oh, this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is talking about typical land uses that would be found within that.
Right.
So it's similar land uses that you would find within
And how
an
many
R3
units-
zone, but those are just the land uses.
how
And it's a
many-
mix of them.
How many units for an O2 per acre?
I'd have to look at.
It's
the
eight per
units.
acre.
Is it eight per acre?
No, it's not acre, it's
In
44. C2, either C2 or O2, one of them is a 44.
Yeah,
Yeah,
C2 is 44,
Okay,
absolutely,
So
commercial
they can
is.
put 44 units per acre all along that area.
I think if you.
So that's already zoned for that right now, most of
No,
that.
it isn't. It is not in the current one, it is not zoning for 44
There-
units
sorry.
per acre.
You're right, it's on C1 and there's some C2, so the C1 is zoned for 36 units per acre. So most of Broadway is currently zoned for 36 or 44 units per acre. Okay.
No, it is not the current one.
The C1 is 36.
Are you talking about the
Yes.
current
Like
plan
here?
or the
I'm
current
talking about
zoning?
the future one. The future one is 44 units per acre, it's a max. You have 44 units per acre, where are all those cars gonna park?
So there's a couple things that would either require rezoning to C2 that would go through a public process, or it could be by using the sunshine law.
That's what you're proposing in this plan, ma'am.
Well, that's
That's what you're
a
proposing.
future land use, that doesn't take effect unless someone requests a rezoning.
That is what the city council is considering.
So, yeah, just to be clear, land use designations do not change zoning once it gets adopted by a plan. It requires an additional step, which is a rezoning that requires public review, a neighborhood meeting, zoning examiner, public hearing, a number of steps to change zoning
It is exactly what you're going to put before the city council.
as a land use map. Yes, which reflects what's already allowed through the Sunshine Mile, on that
You
corridor.
look at the current plan, where's the current plan, take a look at the zoning map.
So, yeah, I think we've gotten as much into zoning as we can right now. There's been a lot of questions, discussion, but we can.
You
One
cut us
last
off
thing.
again.
And I'm very, very respectful. I know that it probably sounds hysterical to people like, oh my God, what are they worried about? Couple more dates for that fund. I moved in 2010, right? And I bought my property, thought it was at the bottom of the market. No, it went down another 50,000 before it came back up, right? I don't think anybody back then was worried about high density, you know, they were worried about keeping the integrity of the neighborhood. 2011 is when the Wildcats moved into High Corbett Field. So that's extended the U of A's planning boundary. And we are now smack dab in the middle of it. So I think that there's additional pressures on our neighborhood that are not felt by the neighborhoods, which need to be considered. And that this whole process and the screaming is why I think it's premature for adoption.
So one thing we can do, I don't know if we have this in the plan, is share a table of all the existing zones and proposed potential zoning districts and what the density is, height, all of that. We put that together for St. Hughes, and I think that would be helpful for the conversation, just so we're all looking at the same thing in terms of density and height and what would be allowed. Meredith had her hand up for a while, so I just wanna make sure we get to Meredith.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I know the state has been in conversation, is pretty directly in conversation right now to really reassess this meaning of R1 and R2 at a state level. And I'm kind of curious, let's say that moves forward at the state level, what would the impact of that be on some of the pages of this plan, which are very much about R1? What's that future if that were, for example, go through at the state level? Does that mean that the plan it needs to be revisited and redrafted to accommodate state law? Or does that mean that there's a dialogue with the city or something else? I'm just kind of curious what the impact of that kind of thing would be for the plan.
Well, first, I just want to mention that the city is very opposed to any preemption at the state level of local zoning, because we think it's really important that any land use change happen through processes like these. And that we can have these discussions and have different viewpoints shared, but we think it's better that it happen in community rooms like this and through processes we have like plan amendments and rezonings to figure out what type of land use is appropriate in our community. So the city of Tucson has opposed any state preemption of zoning. But yes, as you're aware, there's been a lot of discussion about how to create more housing as a state, because there's a need for more housing. And so some of the proposals are for state level legislation that would essentially create some baseline densities that cities have to accommodate in terms of new housing density. There's been a lot of different proposals that have not been successful, but there are still some proposals at the state level, and there's a few. Some are around ADUs. There's another bill around multifamily development, particularly close to downtown areas, really making sure we're allowing more housing in areas with job access and transit access. So, but what the impact would be if there was something to be approved and adopted at the state level, it wouldn't affect the plan, because the plan, like Rebecca said, the plan is advisory, so it would still be a document that establishes your neighborhood's priorities and goals. That wouldn't have to change. What could change potentially is some of the zoning. So we've talked about underlying zoning, that R1 already allows ADUs, the plan doesn't affect that. So if the state level, legislation changed and says cities over a certain size, you have to allow ADUs, or minimum lot size has to be, smaller than it is now, that could change our zoning. So right now, R1 has a 7,000 square foot minimum lot size. There's been discussion about, that's one of the things that's been proposed at the state level in past cycles, is reducing that minimum lot size, for example, to allow more starter homes. So it is possible that there could be preemption at the state level. It wouldn't change the plan, but it might change what development is allowed.
And what R1 meant.
What R1
Right.
means, yeah. Mhm.
And short-term housing bills being looked at as well. To really
Restrictions on
get
short-term
yeah.
housing, yeah, there's a
Those
lot of
things
different
are-
housing bills. Mhm, yeah.
But just to reinforce that, it wouldn't matter if it's the state or the city, the impact of that would be that, much like zoning works today, would simply be the reference point for the plan. You don't need to change the plan, but those are asserted as zoning for our neighborhood. Yeah. Thanks.
Are there other questions?
I have,
Yeah.
one of the things that was stated early on in this process is that this whole new plan was organic to the Broadmoor neighborhood. And in fact, the city initiated this whole thing with a meeting over on the west side, I think it was 2018, for all the neighborhoods in the city of Tucson to update their plans. This came from the city manager and the mayor and council.
It wasn't the city, it was Tucson Residents for Responsive Government that did that. We did collaborate because we came with a slideshow to explain what zoning was and all, but that was totally Trig that did that. They provided they came up with a tool for people to use, neighborhoods to use to assess their plans. There were about 40 neighborhoods, I think, who came to that meeting.
I attended the meeting.
Yeah, so quite a few of them did assess their plans, quite a few decided, their goals were still relevant, they hadn't done what you had done, which was to meet a lot of them. But a number decided to go ahead and update, but that was definitely Trig. I know that because I was very involved with them, calling and going, we're gonna do this, which was absolutely their right to do. And what we wanted to do was just to be sure that there was an understanding of the zoning, what zoning meant and all. So we did that, but that was definitely a
The
Trig.
land use part of our new plan was authored by the city of Tucson. It didn't come from the neighborhood. It came from your office, I think, and it was introduced to our neighborhood in January. I guess it was given to you in January. And nobody really knew anything about this land use part of this plan. when we had a neighborhood meeting and a vote on the new plan, the meeting was adjourned before we even got into land use. And so I think that really, there are very few people in Broadmoor that even know about this thing or what the contents are. Everybody's busy, they're working. And I think this thing was pushed through with a minimum number of people participating in the review of the plan. Now, Barbara mentioned that they've been working on it since 2005, but the neighborhood land use part of the plan wasn't given to the neighborhood until January of this year. And that's just inadequate.
Yeah,
That's incorrect. First of all, I wasn't even here in 2005 in this neighborhood, so I have not a clue. My participation in the plan and the neighborhood deciding to go ahead was in 2018, and that was at a general meeting. We cannot force people to come to those general meetings, but the people that were at that general meeting wanted it to go ahead. We presented over and over all what we had of the plan every step of the way. There was always a land use section. We did include the maps, we didn't have the maps.
Yeah, and I will say that the map was encouraged by the city. I would be the first to say that, because that is what our entitlement group looks at. And if there's not a map, they really have trouble with figuring out how a rezoning. And you had a map in your previous plan,
Right.
so it wasn't something new. You have a future land use. I don't know if you want to pull that slide up. We have a comparison. They're not that,
Yeah, keep going.
one more. There. So they're not really, there's a lot of similarity here. I don't know, Dan, if you want to walk through it, but this is what you have in your 1988 plan as a future land use plan.
Yeah, so the future land use plan basically says this whole area along Broadway is high density residential, office, commercial, which is essentially mixed use. So you have the whole mixed use portion right here that matches pretty much the same portion that you have for the mixed use here. When you start looking down here, this is a change. But what it does is it reflects the existing zoning. So the existing zoning there is R2, which is medium density residential. So all you're doing is basically showing that it matches what that zoning is. Same here, there's a little portion on this corner right here that didn't have a land use designation. That's also R2. So it was just done in order to make sure that those are matching, so it's consistent. So this portion here, again, the medium density residential, this was all medium density residential. Everything else in here all remained the same. It basically was low density residential on that one, and now it's low density residential in this one. So the only real changes are updating this portion to make sure that it matches what the existing zoning is and allows, and a change from what was high density residential, office, commercial to mixed use all along here. Yes, of course.
So I can remember reading, I think it was in the Sunshine Mile controversy, I read through or skimmed through, but read through very specifically parts of Plan Tucson. And they say acquire residential along arterial streets. This is for Broadway. That would be Country Club and Tucson Boulevard. So how does this affect Plan Tucson's plan to acquire residential for development?
I am not aware of that.
Was that in
policy.
Plan Tucson, or was that
It's in the
in
Sunshine
the
Line.
Broadway
Or the
improvement project where they were looking to acquire land for the right of the?
It might be in the Broadway improvement project, but I thought it was in Plan Tucson.
So at this point, the city has no plans to acquire any residential properties along Broadway, that I'm aware of, at least.
This is on the,
We don't have residential.
the arterial
I
streets.
mean, occasionally our housing department does acquire property that can support multifamily, so they could be looking at properties, but I'm not aware of any in this area they're
Because,
considering.
I mean, I'm totally concerned with that because I know they were trying to build 70-foot buildings along Broadway, and the lots along Country Club are really deep, which would make a beautiful place to put 70-foot buildings again.
Yeah, so if anybody wanted to do anything of that sort with this land use map, they would have to come back for a full plan amendment, change that land use designation, and then go through with the rezoning process. So as far as this, the way this land use map, the direction it's giving you is that this will remain the same.
The city's trying, it's pretty good about forcing that kind of thing through.
Again, if the plan were as this, that's what you would have to do.
Well, I'd just like to speak to the issue of that the neighborhood was not informed or did not know or did not have a chance to participate. Because when this started and all of the different sections, for instance, safety and environment, and I can't remember what they all are. But anyway, way back then, there were committees that were formed, people were informed about it. We were asked if we would like to participate in those things. I attended, I think meetings were held I think it was every month, but I know I went to 2 or 3 of them myself. So there was lots and lots of communication, advertising, and you know, maybe people didn't choose to be informed or to
So,
participate, but there were so many chances for people for years to come and participate in this.
Right, and I'd like to add that we posted, and they're still up there on the website, all iterations of the plan. As we went along, we kept posting them up on our website. So there was always the opportunity to read the entire whatever we had going at the time.
Okay, response to your statements. In the Sunshine Mile, neighborhoods were given the option to opt out of the Sunshine Mile. Our neighborhood was never informed. Now, if the board wishes to disagree with that, may I remind certain board members who were copied on the letter, the first letter to City Council. Steve Kazajic and Mike Rankin. One of those things in there was the opt-out. Now, you're telling us, so what we could have done as a neighborhood was opted out of the Sunshine Mile. And before you tell us that that wasn't the case, it was one of the 2 neighborhoods in Councilmember Fimbres' district that they actually had a meeting with Councilmember Fimbres' chief of staff and Fletcher McCusker to discuss the opt-out option. But our neighborhood was never told about that.
This meeting is not about the Sunshine Mile, it's about our plan.
That was adopted by mayor and council with a lot of opportunity for comments, you know. and
The
also
neighborhood
zoning
didn't know
standards.
about it, Corin.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
Oh, I'm
what all
sure.
those discussions were. I think there was also different viewpoints in this neighborhood about the Sunshine Mile, but yeah, again, it's been adopted. I think we should focus on the neighborhood plan tonight. That
Well,
is
this
what-
plan had nothing to do with the Sunshine Mile. And we're talking about we're talking about the plan tonight, not the Sunshine Mile.
No, we're not gonna be shut down, okay?
Let's have somebody else.
Yeah, so I am new, I said I'm new to the neighborhood, listening to the discussion here. If, I don't think this is gonna capture, I think, the depth of the concern, but I think what I'm hearing is, one, there's a concern, I think, about taller buildings potentially being built on the outskirts of the neighborhood. Secondly, the impact of the mixed use commercial designation, particularly impacting parking. And then third, I think the biggest underlying issue is concern for people around losing the potential tax breaks for single family residences. So the zoning issue is not controlled by the neighborhood from what you guys have explained. The parking considerations, I think there are potentially mechanisms discussed in the plan around permitting or other things. And so the third biggest issue, which I think impacts a lot of the residents, is really how do we as a neighborhood go about preserving the historic character of the R1 lots. And so my question, because I believe Sam Hughes and I think Armory Park have put mechanisms in place that help enforce amongst the neighborhood some of the historic character designation and perhaps do better jobs of broadcasting the benefits to residents of maintaining historic character of houses. And do you guys, which may be outside of your purview, have recommendations on mechanisms this group of people could pursue to get to outcomes similar to Sam Hughes or to Armory Park?
So, a couple of things, you guys are a National Register District neighborhood, which there's I think like 40 or 50 of across the city, there's a lot of neighborhoods that have that designation. What you're referring to, I think, in Armory Park is what's called a historic preservation zone, that's a local zoning designation, it's actually putting historic design standards in zoning. So that's a higher level of historic review process. Sam Hughes doesn't have that, they actually have inquired about the possibility of either a historic preservation zone or really what they're thinking about is a neighborhood preservation zone, which has some of similar qualities. Getting into that would probably be longer than we have tonight, historic preservation zone versus neighborhood preservation zone. But I will say Rincon Heights is pursuing a neighborhood preservation zone, and that proposal is going to mayor and council probably in the next several months, once we have a Ward 6 council member. So there are options. There's trade-offs, and so for example, Rincon Heights, that neighborhood had a lot of discussion for years about whether they wanted to be a neighborhood preservation zone, because it does impose design standards, and it means when you're, you know, changing, adding to your house or changing something on your roof, it would require design review. So there's just a lot to discuss and think about as a neighborhood there. Rincon Heights went through that process of discussing it, hashing it out, and they did decide to pursue it. So it's something you guys can absolutely pursue, and that could be something you follow up with after this neighborhood plan. You guys could consider exploring the neighborhood preservation zone or historic preservation zone options and talk to, you know, the new council member about that option.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And we would be
and-
happy to share more about that at another meeting.
In our plan under the first goal, actually, is that we inform realtors, sellers and contractors when contributing property during transition. And we have letters that we give to new owners and all that, trying to keep the house in historic designation. We're acutely aware that we're walking a fine edge here, that it could go either way, and we want to keep that. And we're working.
Just a small comment, which is a good reason to go to board meetings. There have already been, I think, 2 board meetings where this has been discussed. And so again, the board is where that work would initiate a conversation with members of the community, so that would be really great.
So I started,
Okay, I have to step out with Christine first. Wayne was asking about the April 2018. When the board initiated the plan. Now, you referenced the TRRG, okay. And that was held when?
The tribute was like 2018.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
TRRG initiated that meeting?
Yeah.
No, they held a citywide meeting that all neighborhoods were invited to. I wouldn't say they
I went
initiated.
to it.
Your plan update, but they put out an invitation to all neighborhoods across the city to participate in a meeting about neighborhood
But the
plans.
city, the board has made a point of saying that they initiated the plan in April 2018.
I'm not sure when it was initiated by.
Approximately, but it was the board initiated.
So after
the
going
board
to,
initiated-
going to the trig meeting, after going to the trig meeting.
Okay, so did the city at any point instruct, let's say the city manager to develop new neighborhood plans?
I don't think the city manager ever instructed that. I think he kind of, I think he welcomed Trig's involvement in that conversation and really encouraged it to be a grassroots neighborhood effort. What the city manager said, to my knowledge, and Rebecca, you actually know more, you were here, and Dan too, you were part of those conversations. I think he basically said that's not really something we have resources for the city, but we really support neighborhoods doing that. If they want to take it on, yeah.
Okay, Gordon, Rebecca,
Someone has their hand up?
Gordon,
Okay,
Rebecca,
okay, I'll check.
just a minute, Gordon, Rebecca.
Yeah.
You may want to take a look and listen to the audio portion of the January 2018 City Council study session, where the city manager was instructed to develop new neighborhood plans. Okay, so what you told me is a contradiction. And I brought that up, and Rebecca, I'm surprised. Did City Attorney Rankin look at this sheet here? Did he approve of it? Did anyone in the staff review it?
That's an informational sheet that's just here to illustrate the timeline.
We actually got this
This is
information
just-
from the neighborhood.
This is just background.
Yeah,
for
So
us to see
Attorney
tonight.
Rankin never saw that. You may want to drop that by him.
Well,
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Yeah.
Okay, so I want to comment on Mary's comment that we should go to the board meetings. I was on the board for 20 years. I went to, or nearly 20 years, and I went to every single board meeting. At that time, we had 5 general neighborhood meetings a year where we could disperse the information. Telling us to come to the, and those neighborhood meetings were advertised from the beginning of the year to the end in that neighborhood newsletter that we sent out. 5 or 6 times a year, probably 6 times a year. You know, these board meetings are advertised a day or 2 before they happen. And, you know, I've been to hundreds of board meetings. I feel as if I should be informed with the newsletter or something like that. I shouldn't have to go to a board meeting to find out what's going on in the neighborhood. We should have neighborhood meetings, but we don't anymore because there's dissension. You know, when I was on the board, if there was a lot of dissension, we kept things, we kept the status quo. We reverted to the status quo. And now the current board is like, oh, you don't agree with us, we're gonna shut you down. We're gonna ignore you.
Okay, so I want to see before we close, if anyone who hasn't had a chance to comment tonight has a comment, or anybody online has a comment.
anybody online like to weigh in?
Hi, this is Richard Rawadi. I live on Arroyo Chico. And I'd just like to say, you know, I've heard a lot of talk about things that aren't the neighborhood plan. And I really just hope that people would take a look and read the neighborhood plan, because there's been a lot of things talked about that aren't in the neighborhood plan. And there are protections for the neighborhood for development on the perimeters of the neighborhood. So, and as been said already, the zoning is the same in 1988 as it is now. In fact, in the 1988 neighborhood plan, they wanted to change the zoning along Tucson Boulevard from R2 to R1, but they were never able to accomplish it. And I think there's a ruling, if I'm not mistaken, in Arizona that down zoning is not permitted, but if the people on Tucson Boulevard were willing to all agree to an R1 zoning, then perhaps that could be accomplished. I think that's kind of outside the purview of the neighborhood plan, but it just goes to, you know, what is zoning and how does zoning work. And so that's my comment.
Thank you, Rick. Anybody else? Anybody else who hasn't spoken? Let's start with who hasn't spoken. Anybody else have a comment here?
I just have a question about the neighborhood vote on the plan. Is that why we're here right now? Was that an important part of the process? If the neighborhood would have voted down this plan, would this have stopped? Would you have, or would you have continued with, you know, implementing the plan and going through the process?
We wait for the neighborhood to bring a plan to us and say we're ready for the city review. It was our understanding that the vote said that was why the vote was taken. That's not something we require, but it is helpful for a neighborhood to do that. And that's normally what a neighborhood does, something of that sort. And no, we wouldn't go ahead if it has to be given to us by the neighborhood and say we're ready to go through the process.
What happened during the vote is that we collected proxy votes for the plan. And at the last minute, the board disallowed proxy votes. And if the proxy votes would have been included in the vote, it would have been defeated. And so one more thing, the board was required by, I believe, state law, correct me if I'm wrong, to provide absentee ballots to people who could not come to the meeting. And that wasn't ever allowed or provided. So it's my opinion that the vote that took place in February over this plan, which had only been in public view for, you know, a week, maybe 2 weeks, is invalid.
Okay, so let me just respond to a couple of things. One is, I think that plan was up online for some time. And if it
Not
was,
with the new.
oh, yeah, no, it was. It
No,
was.
not with, you gave the new land use plan
In
to the
December.
board in December.
Yeah, and the plan was, up
It
after
wasn't
that.
published on our website until January.
Well,
It was on the website without the map. That's all that was missing. The map.
Well, the map is like the most
Okay,
The
important part.
maps went in December.
Yeah.
But let me address a couple of things. There is a difference between a proxy and an absentee vote. Instead of absentee voting, it was a virtual as well as in-person meeting. So those that could not come to the meeting could come virtually, number one. Number two, we had allowed proxies in a neighborhood bylaws vote. What happened that caused us to not recognize proxies were twofold. Number one, in the bylaws, when we presented what the changes in the bylaws were, several of the people with proxy votes said, wait a second, I'm withdrawing my proxy because that was not how I understood the changes to be. So we wanted to make sure that people understood what the new plan was as opposed to the old plan when they voted. And we wanted to make sure that it was all on the up and up. Secondly, we were informed that by several people that the proxy was not just for the one vote. And it is illegal to have a proxy that is for a year, regardless of what's going on.
No,
Also, I would like to state that we had, I don't know, I wasn't in a neighborhood, by the time I arrived in the neighborhood, and we were only having 2, maybe occasionally 3 general meetings a year. And we still continue to have 2 to 3 general meetings a year. So as long as I've been in the neighborhood.
Which isn't very long.
Well, it's 8 years, so I'm assuming that what that means in the last few years, it goes back 8 years and could have been going on before then. But for the last 8 years, we haven't had more than 3 general meetings a year.
let me, hold on, just you had a comment, but let me just say one thing. I'd like to make clear that state law has no, there's nothing in state law about neighborhood association voting. Neighborhood associations, and I can say this because I talked a lot to neighborhood associations. You go by your bylaws. The city does not monitor how you use your bylaws. We do ask for the bylaws. We do check that they don't have anything that would turn you into an HOA, any, exclusionary statements. But how you determine how you vote and all is up to your neighborhood association totally. And so that is something you should think about. And if your bylaws aren't working for you, you should address them. But that is an important. Sir, did you have a comment?
Not yet.
Okay.
Arizona law trumps everything other than federal law. Hold on.
Yeah.
Arizona law says absentee ballots have to be provided.
I'm not sure that applies to neighborhood
Yeah,
associations, because
it
they're
does.
voluntary associations,
I
they're not
will-
actually a government entity.
Arizona law trumps everything.
I will reach out to our attorney's office and
Yeah,
raise that
we'll look
issue
at
and
that.
we'll look at it.
One of the problems with your attorney is
But
that
that's different.
he's decided not to be involved in any neighborhood disputes. He has a memo that he put out
Yeah.
15 years ago
Yeah.
and says, oh, that's not under my purview. And it seems to me that every other level of government has some sort of higher authority that can, intervene or coach or advise. And yet at the city level with neighborhood associations, the attorney of the city of Tucson isn't involved. And I think
We
there's a
will
problem.
comment on your bylaws. We will answer questions. We will, talk to attorneys, not necessarily Mike, but the attorney who works with us. And that's something I'm willing, happy to talk to you all about. I just think it's important to remember, as Corn said, that these are not government entities. Neighborhood associations are not government entities. You could have a neighborhood association, not be, the registration of what provides you with some services. if you choose not to have those services, you can have a neighborhood association and do whatever you want.
But
yeah.
yet when the state substituted absentee ballots for proxy votes, okay, that's when it applied to corporations, it applied to everybody, and as far as I know, we're in the state of Arizona. So for you to say, well, no, and you're right, there aren't many laws with neighborhood association. It doesn't matter, there's general statements made by the state.
If you were a corporate, if you were 501c3, it might actually apply then. I don't believe you are you? I mean, but I will check on that. So we have quite a few neighborhood associations who are 501c3, so they are, you know, there are other laws that, but are there other comments about the plan at this point, since that's our focus here? Yeah.
One last comment, I actually would like to just say, I think there's a lot of really wonderful stuff in the plan. When I step back and think about the kinds of things that I've had an opportunity to participate in since joining the neighborhood, and the kinds of things that make the quality of life in our neighborhood phenomenal, they aren't the land use dimensions per se, they're the other things we commit to doing together voluntarily. And that, from my point of view, there are many things we can do. The city's interest on the land use is important. But at the end of the day, the power of the plan to focus our collective volunteer efforts together is the thing that I would like to not lose in this. There's a lot of great stuff that's emerged, a lot of great projects that have happened. And I know there's a lot there is disagreement about what is ultimately in the plan, but I do think the elements that are community building and neighborhood building will continue forward. And I think it's what makes part of this neighborhood really incredible. So I don't want to lose sight of that in the context of a lot of what's being discussed. There's some great stuff in there that I think helps us focus on the work ahead. So
Yeah, there's
Well said.
yeah.
So since we're gonna move forward, so the next thing is you all do your thing and then June 5th is the target date? Is that where, right there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
Still on that plan.
that's the study session, and at that, it will be our opportunity, and we'd like to have somebody from the neighborhood association just explain what this plan is. They'll get it ahead if they have any questions, but that's really more informational. It's not the public piece.
Okay.
And then we'll go to the public hearing when you're all welcome to come and share your diversity of opinions.
To the entire
Yeah.
neighborhood for the public hearing, so everyone will get noticed about the planning commission public hearing. So there'll be opportunity for comment verbally, in person, it's a hybrid meeting, so in person or online, or you can send written comments to the planning commission.
Yeah.
So it's just the July meeting where there's really that public hearing with opportunity for public comment. You're welcome to attend the study session, but just know there's no hearing, so that's not really the opportunity for comment. That's when we're just briefing the planning commission on what this is and give them a heads up and an overview of what they're gonna be reviewing at that public hearing.
The June 5th, that we can come,
Definitely, it's open to the public,
Yeah,
open to the public.
do you know the location?
It's the mayor council chambers at City
Okay.
Hall.
And we'll let you all know that, and once this gets agendized, as they say, you know, making sure that that happens, that there's a quorum and all those things, we will definitely let you confirm that that's going ahead. I would also offer that, I know we had a lot of conversation and I think there's some confusion, and I know this often is true and with me about some of the zoning and and always happy to answer questions, you know, if you want to come down to the office and sit down and look at a map, happy to do that, because it can get a little muddy, even when you do it all the time. I think, you know, you have to go back and look at it. But I really appreciate you coming tonight. We did send cards out to everybody that on our address list, which we get from the assessor's office. And we know that it ended up in some competition with the mayor and council, which we had sent the postcard out ahead, so we thought trying to cancel at that point would have been difficult, but we really appreciate your coming tonight and sharing your thoughts, and we're here to answer more questions, and if you have a few questions before we leave, we're happy to do that too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.